Every long-running serial leaves fossils inside itself. A character is introduced with enormous ceremony, handed powers that appear to sit at the very top of the story's hierarchy, treated by the narration as a permanent fixture. And then, without a death scene anyone remembers, without a farewell, without a single member of the cast ever noting the vacancy, he simply stops being in the story. Sometimes this is carelessness. More often it is a kind of geology. The series has drifted into a new formation, and the character belongs to the older rock. Yu-Gi-Oh! Offers one of the cleanest specimens in the medium. Shadi arrives early, robed and turbaned, carrying the Millennium Key and the Millennium Scales, and he does something that no other character in the franchise ever manages. He judges the protagonist and is not punished for it. Then he evaporates. The evaporation is worth studying, not because it is a plot hole, but because it is diagnostic. Shadi was not written out because someone ran short of ideas for him. He was written out because the series he had been designed for stopped existing underneath his feet, and he had no way to live in the one that replaced it. Start with what he actually does, stripped of atmosphere. Shadi is a referee. He appears without being summoned, by nobody's invitation and at nobody's request. He imposes an ordeal that the subject did not agree to and cannot decline. He adjudicates the outcome according to criteria he never publishes and is never asked to defend. Then he leaves. He is not a villain. He has no ambition anyone can name, no territory, no vendetta, nothing he wants from Yugi except the answer to a question he has already decided how to score. He is also not an ally, because allies explain themselves, and because allies can be relied upon, and Shadi's whole affect is the affect of something that might do anything. He occupies a third category the franchise would very shortly have no use for at all, the impartial supernatural. Authority without accountability. Verdict without procedure. It is a coherent and even elegant piece of character design. It also belongs to one specific kind of story, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Was that kind of story for perhaps a few dozen chapters. Look at his equipment, because the equipment makes the argument for you. The Millennium items are, for the most part, weapons and instruments of dominance. The rod controls, mines, and doubles as a blade. The ring locates the other items and hosts a thief who wears people. The eye reads your hand and bends your will. The puzzle houses a king. Shadi carries the two that do nothing to you at all. The key, which lets him open the door to the room where your soul lives and walk around inside the architecture. And the scales, which set a heart on one pan and the feather of judgment on the other and let the balance say what it says. Neither is a weapon. Both are diagnostic instruments. Shadi does not conquer anybody, he inspects them. He is the franchise's auditor. And this is the part that dates him so precisely. An auditor is only a frightening figure in a world where the books cannot be examined by anyone else. The horror of Shadi is the horror of being assessed by a standard you are not permitted to read. That horror has a shelf life, and its expiry date is the moment the standard gets printed on the card. The early series is a horror-inflected morality serial, and it is worth remembering how genuinely nasty it is. A bully, a cheat, a thief, an abusive teacher, an armed robber crosses Yugi's path. The other Yugi surfaces. A shadow game is improvised out of whatever happens to be lying around the scene. Dice, a lighter, a yo-yo, a jigsaw puzzle, a loaded gun, and the rules are invented on the spot, announced with total confidence, and revealed at the decisive moment to have contained a clause the loser never suspected. The punishment is disproportionate, permanent, and frequently a form of poetic mutilation of the mind. The engine of that fiction is the systematic withholding of explanation. You are not supposed to be able to audit a shadow game. If you could audit it, if you could go back and check the terms and confirm that the ruling was correct, it would stop being an eruption of the uncanny into a schoolyard and become a contest. Dread requires asymmetry of information, and in those chapters, nobody, not the victim, not the reader, is on the right side of it. Shadi is the apex predator of that logic. He is what the shadow game looks like when it turns around and points at the hero. He arrives, takes people apart to see how they work, endangers Yugi's friends as a means of applying pressure, watches to see what the boy does under it, and delivers a verdict that Yugi has no way of contesting and no framework for anticipating. Crucially, he is not beaten. He is satisfied. In a story whose organizing premise is unappealable judgment, a man whose entire function is to hand down unappealable judgments is not a loose thread at all. He is the thesis rendered as a person, and the fact that he leaves Yugi alive is the single scariest thing about him, because it establishes that the alternative was available and was on the table the whole time. And then a card game ate the series. This is the fact that governs everything else. And it is easy to underrate because we have all lived downstream of it for 25 years. Duel Monsters is the opposite kind of object from a shadow game in every respect that matters to this argument. It has printed text, it has a rule book, an errata process, an official ban list, tournament brackets, resolution order for simultaneous effects, and judges you can physically call over to your table. Its pleasure, the pleasure the manga spent hundreds of chapters patiently training its audience to feel, is procedural. It is the pleasure of a trap revealed, of an interaction the loser should have played around, of a combination assembled out of pieces that were all visible in principle. The line that became the franchise's signature is not "you have been weighed and found wanting." It is "you activated my trap card." and that is a sentence about a rule that was sitting face down on the table in plain view, with an agreed protocol for when it could be flipped. The change is not only tonal, it changes what the reader is. In the early chapters, the reader is a spectator at a punishment, positioned to feel the same vertigo the victim feels. In the Duel Monsters chapters, the reader is a student of a system, and increasingly a customer who owns the system, who has the actual cards in an actual binder, and can check whether the manga is playing fair. A story that spends years cultivating rules literacy in its audience cannot comfortably keep a referee on staff who refuses to show his working. Shadi does not merely become unnecessary in that environment, he becomes something closer to an embarrassment. A ruling with no appeal window in a fiction organized around the promise that everything is adjudicable if you read carefully enough. The later series is full of characters who cheat, cards up the sleeve, rigged machines, stacked decks, marked ante. And the moral energy of every one of those arcs comes from the assumption that the rules are real and that violating them is a genuine offense. Shadi cannot be a cheat, because he is not playing anything. He is the last figure in the franchise for whom the concept simply does not apply. Watch his job get parceled out to successors, and notice what every successor has that he lacks. The Egyptian mysticism goes to the Ishtars, a family with a hereditary occupation, a lineage, a residence, a set of scars, and a long list of grudges. Ishizu delivers Shadi's information in expository paragraphs to seated listeners, the same content in a register Shadi could never have used, because his information was only frightening while it was withheld. The testing function goes to the tournament apparatus itself. Battle City is a machine for sorting the worthy from the unworthy, and it does the sorting with brackets, entry requirements, anti-rules, and a location on a map. The Judgment of the Dead atmosphere is redistributed into named priests with named monsters and a war with a chronology. Everything Shadi once did anonymously, later characters do with motive, backstory, screen time, and a documented relationship to the protagonist. The series did not discard his functions. It kept every one of them and threw away only the anonymity, which turns out to have been the entire character. There is a genre migration underneath this that is worth naming. The Egypt of the early chapters is horror Egypt, curses, tomb robbers, the weighing of hearts, punishments visited on the impious by forces older than anyone alive. It is the Egypt of the Universal Monster movie and the museum exhibit that should not have been opened. The Egypt of the later arcs is epic Egypt. A royal court, 6 priests, a pantheon with 3 god cards you can hold in your hand, a national catastrophe, a king with a name that the entire endgame exists to recover. These are not the same imaginative resource, and Shadi is made entirely out of the first one. The scales that weigh a soul are a Book of the Dead prop. The god cards are an Iliad prop. When a story migrates from the first mode to the second, the priests survive because they can be given lines and armies, and the anonymous judge does not, because epic requires that power be held by persons with names, and horror requires that it not be. The commercial pressure runs in exactly the same direction, which is why the outcome was never in doubt. Yu-Gi-Oh! Became, among other things, a machine for converting characters into cardboard. A character's soul, commercially speaking, is a deck theme, a signature monster, a strategy that can be described in a booster pack. Look at how thoroughly this applies even to the franchise's mystics. Bakura is a spirit of a thief who nonetheless sits down and plays a deck. Merrick is a tomb keeper with a psychotic alter ego who nonetheless sits down and plays a deck. Pegasus can read minds through a Millennium item. And the series routes that power through the card game so completely that his mind reading becomes functionally a rules problem for Yugi to solve. Every supernatural power in the later series gets laundered through the game, because that is the only currency the story still accepts. Shadi never sits down. He has no signature monster, no strategy, nothing printable. A character who cannot be sold in a story whose engine is selling has no reason to keep occupying panel space, and more importantly, no way to participate in the only kind of scene the story still knows how to stage. He is also, in a series that becomes almost aggressively about attachment, a man with no relations whatsoever. The later Yu-Gi-Oh! Defines nearly everyone through kinship or its wreckage. Kaiba and Mokuba, the Ishtar siblings, Januchi's sister, Yugi and his grandfather, the pharaoh and his court, and above all the friendship group whose collective loyalty is treated as a literal source of power. Shadi has no family, no home, no hometown, no friend, no dependent, nobody who would look for him. In the horror mode, this is an asset. The uncanny should not have a mother, but in the mode the series adopts, unrelatability in the literal sense is a disqualification. There is no slot for him at the table, and the story's characteristic move of resolving conflict by drawing the antagonist into the circle of friendship has nothing to grip. You cannot befriend a scale. Then there is the protagonist problem, which may be the decisive one. In the early chapters, the spirit in the puzzle is genuinely alarming. An unknown quantity wearing your friend's body, dispensing sentences nobody asked him to dispense, with no accounting of where he came from or what he wants. A story in that configuration needs some external power capable of checking him, capable of looking straight at him and asking what he is. Shadi is that check, and the scene works because for once the reader is watching the frightening thing be frightened of something else. But the series spends the following decade performing a slow and complete rehabilitation of that spirit, converting him into the hero, then into a king, then into a soul with a destiny, a court, a name, and an entire final arc devoted to giving him rest. Once he is the pharaoh, nobody is permitted to outrank him. A figure who can put the pharaoh on a scale and grade him stops being an atmospheric detail and becomes a demotion of the protagonist. Keeping Shadi around would have cost the series precisely the thing it had spent years buying. Which makes his single indispensable scene also his suicide note. When Shadi slides the key into Yugi's mind and walks in, he finds two doors. Behind one is a child's playroom, toys everywhere, unlocked, welcoming, defenseless. Behind the other is a labyrinth of staircases and doorways and traps that leads nowhere and everywhere, an interior that cannot be mapped by anyone including its occupant. That image is the entire second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! In Embryo. Proof that the other Yugi is a separate person, that his mind is a puzzle in the same way the puzzle is, that the great mystery of the story lives inside the protagonist rather than out in the world. It is also, read from a distance, a picture of the series' own two halves. The toy room of games is play and friendship and childhood, and the labyrinth of games is ordeal, memory, and death. Shadi hands the franchise its central metaphor, and in the same gesture renders himself redundant, because once the unexplained thing is interior, you no longer need an exterior judge to come knocking. The labyrinth becomes the plot. The man who unlocked the door is left standing in the hallway with nothing to do. So the series forgets him, and the manner of the forgetting is as revealing as the fact. There is no defeat, because he is not a villain and defeating him would require a duel he cannot have. There is no thanks, because he is not a friend and gratitude would require a relationship he never formed. Nobody in the cast ever asks after the man who walked around inside their heads, which is a startling omission in a story where the characters remember every other slight and kindness with operatic intensity. Instead, the continuations reach backward and retrofit him, associating the key with an ancient priest of the pharaoh's court, or recasting him as a guardian spirit who was never quite a living man with living motives in the first place. That retrofit is the most telling move available, because declaring a character to have been a spirit all along is a way of announcing that no motive was ever owed and no follow-up is required. It is the narrative equivalent of filing a person under weather, and the fact that the various continuities dispose of him differently, with no single exit that any of them treats as load-bearing, tells you that no exit was needed. You only need to stage a departure for a character the story still owes something to. The obvious objection is that all of this is overreading a practical matter. Serialized manga is improvised under deadline. Takahashi did not know in Chapter 15 that the card game would swallow the series whole. Characters get dropped because a working writer is steering week to week and cannot go back. That is all true, and none of it damages the reading, because improvisation is not randomness. It is a writer responding to pressure, and the pressure is legible in what survives. Serials are ruthless recyclers. They bring back anything that can be made to work. Minor rivals get promotions. One-off gimmicks become arcs. Background classmates acquire personalities and decks. When a series conspicuously fails to recycle a character it built at the top of its own hierarchy, that failure is information about the machine. Shadi is not evidence of forgetfulness. He is evidence of incompatibility, and the incompatibility is specific and nameable. He cannot duel, he cannot explain, he cannot be outranked, and he cannot be loved. Read the vacancy as a stratum, then. The shady layer is the layer in which Yu-Gi-Oh! Believed that judgment did not have to justify itself. That the terrifying thing about a game was that the rules were never yours to see, and that the proper response to an unknown power was not to challenge it, but to survive being examined by it. Everything above that layer is a series making the opposite promise to its audience. That every mystery is a coupon redeemable for exposition. That every ancient thing has a tablet somewhere with the answer carved on it. That the past is a place with a floor plan. And that if you lose it will be because of a card you should have played around. The two positions cannot coexist for long. And the franchise chose the second so completely that it eventually built its climax out of a rules-legal duel in which the hero wins by knowing the game better. There is no scale in that room, and there is something quietly apt in how it ended for him, given who he was. Shadi entered the story as a figure who examined people without ever accounting for himself, took what he needed from them, delivered a verdict nobody could appeal, and walked out of the room, leaving them to work out what had happened. The series he made possible eventually did exactly that to him. No accounting, no verdict, no explanation, gone. The referee who never explained himself was, in the end, never explained. It is the only judgment he ever received, and it was rendered in his own style.